and welcome. I'm James Milan, and thanks for joining us for this debate today on ballot question number 2. I'm going to go over the format for the debate first, and then a brief summary of the ballot question, and we will then get right to the debate itself. So the format for the debate will include both of our guests having an opening statement, which will be 1 minute each. And then we will move into a series of questions, 6 in total, that will come from me and that I will grab from this bowl right here. And they will be delivered round robin to our two guests. At the conclusion of that round of questions, the guests will have an opportunity to ask each other 2 questions each. In all cases, the answers will be confined to 2 minutes, and then there will be a 1-minute rebuttal available to the other guest. We're at the conclusion of the rounds of questions, there will be a 1-minute closing statement from each of our guests as well. And to remind you, this is a question on, or a debate on ballot question number 2. I'm going to read a quick summary of that, which is known also as the expanded bottle bill question. The proposed law would expand the state's beverage container deposit law, also known as the bottle bill, to require deposits on containers for all non-alcoholic, non-carbonated drinks in liquid form intended for human consumption, except beverages primarily derived from dairy products, infant formula, and FDA-approved medicines. The proposed law would not cover containers made of paper-based biodegradable material and aseptic multi-material packages such as juice boxes or pouches. And a yes vote would expand the state's beverage container deposit law to require deposits on containers for all of the kinds of beverages I just described, and make other changes to the law as well. A no vote would make no change in the laws regarding beverage container deposits. Arguing here today for the yes on 2 campaign is Ken Donnelly, and on my right is Nicole Giambusso, who will be arguing for the opponents of the law. So without further ado, we're going to move to Mr. Donnelly for a 1-minute opening statement. By the way, thank you both for being here.
Thank you, James.
Mr. Donnelly.
Hello, I am Ken Donnelly, Senator Ken Donnelly. I am here today to ask you to vote yes on a very important ballot question, question 2. The big money corporations and their $8 million of ads want to cloud the issue, confuse the voters with misleading information. The simple truth about question 2 is it will reduce litter and divert 1.25 billion bottles from our streets, parks, and landfills to our recycling. I have no financial dog in this fight. I have 5 very good reasons why I support this bill. It's Luke, Jonah, Coben, Jack, and Layla, my grandchildren. We have an obligation to leave this planet cleaner than we found it for them. That means we need to reduce our environmental footprint. Clean air, clean water, and less litter. Since when do we rely on big business to set our environmental policies?
Excuse me for interrupting you, but we're going to go to Ms. Giambusso for your opening statement.
Hi, I'm Nicole Giambusso, and I'm the spokesperson for No on Question 2, Stop Forced Deposits. I'm here to tell you that we all agree that our state, the state of Massachusetts, needs to increase recycling and keep our streets clean. But the disagreement is in how to go about it. And when you really look closely at question 2, you find out that it's not simple at all. What we have is a proposal that costs too much and does too little. It requires grocers to redeem containers at their stores, and that will add about $68 million a year to grocery costs. Those are costs that will trickle down to consumers. This is all for a proposal that will only increase recycling by 1/8% because it's incredibly narrow. It only targets beverage containers and it ignores the rest of the stream. The initial deposit law was passed in 1982, and I think we can all agree that that was a very different time. Back then, curbside recycling didn't even exist. Today, 90%...
I'm sorry. We're going to move right into the rounds of questions, or the round of questions, and the first one will go to you, Ms. Giambusso.
Great.
and it might be pertinent to what you were just saying. How much will it cost to implement question 2 if it's passed by voters? And how much will the new containers that are necessary cost initially and then annually? And how does that compare to the extra funds that might be expected to be collected?
Okay, there's a lot I can address there. So question 2 would add about $68 million a year to grocery costs, and that's not beverage containers alone, that's groceries across the board because it's such a financial burden for the grocers themselves. But then you have the 5-cent per container deposit, and it's estimated that $27 million a year in unclaimed deposits from people who possibly are recycling those containers at home in their curbside bins or in drop-off centers, are recycling those containers but sacrificing that 5 cents, and it goes to the state. So that's the $68 million plus the $27 million going to the state. Our opponents have discussed creating a clean environment fund, but that's been done in the past and it's been raided by the legislature. It has a history of being raided. So there's nothing in this proposal to stop that money from going right to the general fund. So what we have is something that costs a lot of money and won't have much of an impact at all on recycling. It's less than 1%. We really need to be focusing on bringing curbside, single stream recycling, where you don't have to separate your containers, you can put it all in one bin, to more communities and putting more recycling receptacles in public places. We need to be comprehensive when it comes to recycling if we're going to create real change.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Donnelly.
This will actually save money. The reason that my communities that I represent support this issue is because it will save money on landfill costs. It will save $7 million a year on their disposal of these receptacles that should be recycled. So I don't see how they can say $68 million as an additional cost when the bottles are already there. They're already being made. There's no additional cost to make those bottles. There's no additional changes in the actual product that we will be receiving. There will just be a $5 deposit, no different than what you have now on Coke, different beverages in beer and beer and other receptacles. This is just big money corporations making sure that they can make their bottom line is larger, and in return, this is a very important environmental issue that we should be going forward with.
Okay, thanks very much. Next question comes right back to you, Mr. Donnelly, and it is, do you believe that imposing 5 cents on more bottles will in fact improve recycling more than expanding curbside recycling would in all of Massachusetts? If so, why?
Yes, because one, there's a study out, and the fact is that 80% of the deposit bottles are now recycled. 23% of the non-deposit bottles are recycled. So that's a big difference, and there's a reason for that. There's no money and incentive to recycle the non-deposit bottles. That's common sense. And so by putting the deposit on those bottles, yes, you will have more people in using the returning those bottles, and we'll have less water bottles, soda bottles, and other bottles on the street. This program, it started in 1982, this anti-litter program has been extremely successful, and we need to continue that. We need to make sure that the anti-litter program gets onto water bottles that weren't out in 1982 when we put the original bill in, and some of the other products that also need to be included. So I think that it will be successful. And the other thing is, when we talk about curbside recycling, it's voluntary. It's voluntary. How many people actually utilize it? So yes, we'll be getting those water bottles that don't biodegrade, clean up our earth, help our future, and make sure that they get recycled.
Okay, thanks very much. Ms. Jambuso, rebuttal?
Sure. Well, first of all, those 80-23 numbers, I've heard them many times, but I've never seen the research that shows how they were reached. And studies show that it's curbside and single stream recycling. Results show that it's curbside and single stream recycling that will really have a positive impact on recycling. I've met with Casella Recycling, who's one of our supporters, and they recycle 1,000 tons of materials a day. They've partnered with the communities to have them adopt single stream recycling and seen those recycling rates go up 50 to 100%. So we know that it's being convenient and being comprehensive that works. I can talk a little bit about where the $68 million cost comes from. Right now, grocers are collecting bottles and cans at their stores. They're collecting beer and soda containers. They don't have the capacity at this point to redeem the numerous additional containers that would be covered under this
We're
law.
going to cut you off, but get right back to you with the next question. And it is, how much has the present bottle bill increased recycling rates, would you say, in the past 5 years? And what evidence would you have to say that this is not the most effective approach?
Well, I haven't seen any research to support the recycling rate increases based on the container deposit law. If you look at the past 30 years, what's really changed is the recycling infrastructure that we have in Massachusetts. So 90% of communities have access to either curbside or curbside or drop-off recycling programs. So I don't think anyone can dispute that we have access today in a way that we didn't. And communities pay for those programs, residents pay for them. So what question 2 would essentially do is charge people twice for recycling, because they'd be paying more at the grocery store, they'd be paying to recycle through their community recycling programs. What we really need to do is build on those programs that allow people to recycle everything in one place at one time. We don't need to invest in 2 systems that will compete, because at the end of the day, question 2 undermines curbside and single stream recycling programs, because it takes the most valuable recyclable materials, which are aluminum and plastic, out of the recycling stream. So when communities lose those materials, they lose the revenue that comes with them. So we're undermining programs that work in modern day 2014 Massachusetts. If you look at 1982, I mean, a lot of things were different then. The typewriters were efficient, and we were using rotary dial phones, and a deposit system might have been, at the time, the best way to recycle. But things have changed today, and we're a progressive state. We need to move ahead and build on what works now.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure.
Rebuttal.
Yes, I'm glad that the opponent mentioned 90%, because those are the ads and those are the figures being used by these big money corporations to say that 90% of the communities have recycling, which is totally untrue. The Boston Globe has shown, and others have shown, that that's untrue. Their ads are untrue. First of all, communities, it's more like 65% of the communities have access to it, and it's a voluntary program. But consider that the curbside recycling does not affect to-go bottles. The communities that I represent are concerned about the ballparks, the fields, and the parks that don't have curbside recycling. That's where our trash is. That's where our litter is. That's why we need to make sure when people go on their bike rides and go for their walks, they shouldn't have to look at the trash all over the fields. That has nothing to do with curbside recycling.
Thanks very much. And Mr. Donnelly, question number 4 is, opponent of question 2 claim that more than $30 million of unclaimed nickels go into programs other than environmental programs. Are they correct? So just 3 questions. Are they correct? Where do the unclaimed nickels go? And who decides where they go?
The unclaimed nickels go to an environmental fund. That's what the proposal in this bill, the proposal, and yes on question 2, would set the money that's unclaimed to go to a environmental fund. That's where the unclaimed money is proposed in this bill. Yes on question 2.
Okay, and so are they correct with the $30 million figure around, how much that money is at the moment in terms of unclaimed nickels?
What those numbers are.
Okay, thanks very much. Ms.
So
Giambusso.
currently, unclaimed deposits, so if you recycle soda containers, soda cans at home, unclaimed deposits go right into the general fund. They don't go to environmental programs. Over the past 10 years, $350 million in unclaimed deposits have gone to the general fund and not to environmental programs. So it's hard to see how that's going to help the environment when we are recycling already at home. My opponent here has talked about keeping our streets clean, and that's absolutely a priority. But when you look at states like Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont, because Massachusetts doesn't compile this kind of aggregate data, states like Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont, beverage containers make up less than 10% of what's found on the ground. So wouldn't it make more sense to put more recycling receptacles in public places, because those target all recyclable materials, not just beverage containers, which I think everyone would agree is not the only source of materials that we're seeing on the ground.
Okay, thanks very much. And moving on to question number 5. Supporters of question 2 claim that passing it will reestablish the Clean Environment Fund that I think both of you have referred to, and that earmarks unclaimed deposits to improve recycling, clean up parks, and fund other environmental projects. Do you know who will decide what projects are targeted, how much and how long they will be funded? Again, who tracks the money and the projects so that the funds in fact do benefit Massachusetts fairly?
Well, my understanding is that the legislature will decide where that money goes. The ballot question language says that it is subject to appropriation. We've seen in the past that this money has not gone to the environment like it's supposed to. It's gone to the general fund. So if we're asking consumers to send more money to the state's general fund and to pay more in grocery costs, then I think we need to have a system that has proven to be effective. And question 2 just simply is not going to be effective. It will only increase recycling by 0.1% because it targets a very narrow portion of the waste stream. So we need to consider that. We need to consider where we're sending people's monies. My opponent has brought up our coalition, and I should probably have defined it a little more. We have over 3,000 members in Massachusetts in the No on Question 2 coalition. That's chambers of commerce in places like Cambridge, Newton, Needham. It's environmentalists, it's individuals who recycle at home and they're concerned about this. It's a lot of grocers throughout the state. And yes, we do have support from beverage companies as well who employ over 4,000 people here in Massachusetts. So there are a lot of people in the state who have thought about this, who want a cleaner environment, but they're opposed to question 2 because it's just not the right direction for Massachusetts.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And my opponent keeps commenting about the small amount of recyclables. We are talking about 1.25 billion bottles per year, enough to fill Fenway Park right up to the green monster seats. That's how many bottles we're talking about. We need to get serious about our environment and making sure that we have a clean environment. Our landfills are getting to the point where they can't take any more. I'm not talking about not recycling. I support recycling 100%. But we're not going to hire recycling police to make sure people take care of that problem and make sure that they go to the right spots. The way we do that is to make sure that we put a value to it and make sure that people recycle and recycle these bottles. It's 1.25 billion bottles, enough to fill Fenway Park up to the green monster seats. We can do better for our children and our grandchildren.
Thanks very much. And the last question of this round comes your way first, Mr. Donnelly. Why not make recycling mandatory, as is the case across much of Europe, or impose a penalty for not doing so?
I don't have any problem with making recycling mandatory. And I think that what we are going to see at some point is the limit on how much trash we can put out. We're already seeing that in Arlington. They just limited it to 2 bags of trash. And so I fully support increasing the recycling. That is not going to do anything for to-go bottles. When people go out for their runs, or that people go out in the ball fields, or when I go up to Burlington and they talk about the bottles that are sitting there, they put out trash barrels, but the trash barrels get filled with lots of different things. So it's not easy to put in a public recycling bin. Unfortunately, people put everything else in the world in those recycling bins. So that's not the answer. The answer is how do we clean up these parks, and that's to-go bottles. We need to make sure that there's an investment. Now, we had a gentleman in Arlington, and the viewers probably know him well, Happy. Happy used to walk around with his cart, and he used to pick up all the bottles and put them in his cart and return them. And Arlington stayed clean, but there was a value to that. That's why those bottles were picked up and they were returned. That's what we have to continue to do. And again, we need to make sure that we clean our environment and be responsible for our children and our grandchildren.
Thank you. Ms. Giambusso.
We agree that we need to clean our environment. Again, the disagreement is in the approach. We need to get serious about how we're going to raise the state's recycling rate. The state of Vermont is a good example. They were recently grappling with whether to add to their forced deposit law, as Massachusetts is examining now. And after a close examination, they decided that it was better to invest in universal recycling. And that's what the state's doing right now, because you need to target waste reduction as a whole. It's not about targeting just these bottles and cans. And question 2 isn't only about on-the-go containers. Gallon jugs of water are included in the law. Half gallons of juice are included in the law. So these are containers that people are consuming at home and they're recycling at home. We need to increase the use of recycling at home. We need to encourage people to recycle. But question 2, it just creates a hassle for families already recycling in their communities.
Okay, thanks very much, and thank you
Sure.
both for that round. And we're going to move on to the next one, which will allow you both to pose up to 2 questions each to each other. And we'll begin with you, Mr. Donnelly, posing a question.
Nicole, big business has spent over $8 million on misleading ads, trying to convince us that a 32-year-old anti-litter program is no longer needed. Why should we trust them with our future environmental policy?
Well, those who are opposed to question 2, I mean, some of the grocers here in Massachusetts, they invest in recycling when it's a good idea and when it's the right thing to do. We all want cleaner communities. The problem is that question 2 costs a lot of money, but also doesn't do anything significant to help recycling. We need to increase recycling rates across the board, but question 2 just isn't the solution. It has people bringing their trash essentially back to a grocery store. It just doesn't make sense.
You have an opportunity for a rebuttal if you'd like.
Thank you. I don't trust big corporations and their $8 million worth of ads to try to say that a 32-year-old anti-litter program doesn't work. It has. It's worked and it works. It's worked very successfully and it's been very popular. And the misleading ads have changed some of the outlook on this, but again, I think it's so important to make sure that we continue to just update a program that was very successful. And that's what we're talking about. Updating a program that's very successful to make sure that you go out for a walk or a run or a bike ride or to wheel your baby in the carriage, you don't have to look at water bottles or other bottles thrown into your parks and in your public places.
Okay, thanks very much. Moving on, next question, your opportunity, Ms.
Sure.
Jacobs.
The ballot language includes every 5 years, the 5-cent deposit amount goes up. It's tied to the consumer price index, and there's no vote from the people of Massachusetts, from the legislature. Why was that automatic increase included in the proposal?
Well, I haven't talked to the proponents about it, but I know that when they index, cost of living goes up. Mm-hmm. Cost of living goes up. And cost of, at 5 cents, when we put a 5-cent deposit on in 1982, how much is 5 cents worth today compared to what it was worth in 1982? Mm-hmm. Not a lot. We have a lot of increases, indexing in our laws, and we see it in general in life, that costs go up as time goes on. And so I think the indexing was that to make sure that there's a value put on those bottles, that we make sure that those bottles don't get put in our parks and our fields, in our open spaces, and they get deposited. And the only way to do that is to have a value on that, to make sure that, they're being adhered to. So I would say that the indexing was put in there to make sure that it stays with the times, so that it doesn't lose due to inflation.
Would you like a rebuttal?
Sure. Again, when we talk about staying with the times, I think we need to be up to date when it comes to recycling. Voters should consider that 5-cent deposit per container, we're talking bottled water, juice, iced tea, sports drinks, jugs of water, will automatically go up every 5 years. And they should consider, in addition to the $68 million in grocery costs and the $27 million a year in unclaimed deposits, if they want to pass a law that will continuously become more expensive without a vote. Again, if we're going to spend that kind of money, we need to do it on something that works, and question 2 just doesn't bring the recycling increases that our state really needs.
Okay, thank you. Next question is yours.
I see water bottles on the side of the road and in our parks, and beverage bottles in the recycling bins. What's the difference between the two?
That's your question?
Yeah, my question is, what's the difference between the water bottle with no deposit that's sitting in our parks, in our streets, and littering our cities and towns, and actually the beverage bottles, which are not? There
are numerous other materials that are found on the ground in our communities, though, and they need to be targeted comprehensively. The solution isn't to add a deposit fee to everything. The solution is to find a comprehensive way to recycle. Beverage containers that families are recycling at home in their curbside, at the end of their driveways should be allowed to use those systems. They're paying for those. They shouldn't have to load up the car on a Saturday morning and drive to the grocery store to stand in line and feed them into a reverse vending machine one by one when they could be recycling them at the curb. I think families here in Massachusetts are very busy and they're paying for recycling, so that they shouldn't have to pay twice to invite more hassle into their lives. We need to keep recycling simple and convenient.
Mr. Donnelly.
I don't see a difference in the two. I see that, and you talk about $68 million in the cost of supermarkets. I haven't seen too many supermarkets go out of business. They're making a decent profit. They do well. They're doing okay. And these big corporations, Coca-Cola and many of these other big corporations, Polar Water, are doing well. We need to make sure that we continue to update this bill, this very successful anti-litter program that we started in 1982, to include the bottles that weren't even thought of back then. We didn't have the water bottles, the mineral water, and the other different waters in bottles back in 1982. We need to upgrade a very successful anti-litter program.
Okay. Thank you. And for our final question of this debate, the honor goes to you to pose it.
Okay. So Massachusetts doesn't compile this kind of aggregate data, but as I said earlier, states like Maine, Vermont, and New Hampshire do compile data as to what's found on the ground, and beverage containers there make up less than 10% of what people are finding. So say in Massachusetts we're ignoring 90% of the problem when it comes to keeping our streets clean, and that's for $68 million a year plus another $27 million in unclaimed deposits. So why is it fair for residents to pay that kind of money for something that ignores 90% of the problem, and how are we going to address the other 90%?
First of all, I don't agree that it's going to cost $68 million to do the recycling. As I said before, it's the same bottles. They're not changing. It's the same bottles with the same product in them. Secondly, the 80% of the deposit bottles find their way back into recycling. 23% of the non-deposit bottles find their way into recycling. That's quite a bit of bottles. And as a matter of fact, it's 1.25 billion bottles that would fill Fenway Park up to the Green Monster seats. That's not an insignificant amount of refuge to go into our landfills, and also some of those into our parks and our city streets. Those are bottles that don't biodegrade. They stay in our earth for hundreds of years, and still we need to make sure we're running out of landfill space. We're running out of cost. We need to make sure that we're better stewards for our environment, for our earth, for our children and our grandchildren.
Thank you.
Well,
Ms. Giambusso, rebuttal.
Sure. Well, let me explain where the $68 million comes from. First of all, those 80-23 numbers, they're not accurate. We haven't seen the research to support them. I also have never seen anything to support the Fenway Park anecdote there. But the truth is we need to increase recycling as a whole, and that means focusing on the entire waste stream. I can explain where the $68 million comes from for grocers. Those machines that they have right now do not accept gallon jugs of water. They do not accept a lot of the containers that these grocers would be taking in. So that means possibly investing in new equipment, diverting staff time, diverting expensive retail space that grocers pay for, and investing in sanitation issues to deal with an influx of these containers. So that's something that is very expensive, but again, worst of all, is not effective when it comes to increasing recycling because people can recycle these containers at home.
Thanks very much. And with that, we conclude the questions portion of this debate, and we invite you both to make your closing statements. Mr. Donnelly, you get to go first.
Thank you. I want to thank ACMi for inviting us here today to discuss and debate this very important issue. On November 4th, you will have some very important decisions to make, none more important than question 2. Voting years will simply update a very successful program that has been in place since 1982, a program that has reduced litter. Big money opponents have spent over $8 million to try to convince you that controlling litter is no longer needed. Since when do we depend on big business to tell us what is right for our environment? Will it be an inconvenience to expand the bottle bill? Of course it will. My parents, grandparents, and their parents were inconvenienced to make our lives better. Don't we owe it to our future generations to reduce litter and leave them with a cleaner planet? Of course. Please join me in voting yes on question 2 on November 4th.
Thanks very much. Ms. Giambusso.
Our state needs to absolutely make it a top priority to increase recycling for future generations to keep our streets clean. Question 2 is absolutely not the answer to doing that. It's an incredibly narrow law that will cost us tens of millions of dollars a year for a 0.1% recycling rate increase. We need to focus on convenience and on targeting the entire recycling stream, the entire waste stream. If proposals like this forced deposit system were really the solution to recycling, then I think more than 10 states would have these forced deposit systems, but they don't. Delaware has repealed theirs, and the state of Vermont just rejected efforts to add to their deposit law, and instead will be implementing universal recycling. That's what we need to look toward here in Massachusetts. We need to look toward the future. And the future is using curbside single-stream recycling that is convenient and that works for people and also costs less. We need to upgrade, not expand a 1982 solution.
Thank you very much. And we do very much want to thank Ken Donnelly and Nicole Giambusso for being here today to express their respective viewpoints with vigor and clarity, making us all more informed as we go into the booth on November 4th. Please make sure to exercise your right to vote on that day. We appreciate your joining us. For Arlington Public News, I'm James Milan.